All right. All right. Welcome to the, I guess, fifth to fourth installation here. It's kind of like 4.5, but it's really the preview and the follow up to the fourth installation of the Air Combat series. And we're going to be talking about turning room and the turning mechanics of it, specifically in relation to the F-15. So here we have Bear, GR, Spec, and Zorgo. This is going to be one of the live lectures that's going to be recorded and posted in the training video section. Other than that, I guess we should just get straight into this. You guys can all see the screen share?
Mm-hmm.
All right. So let's get into this. So we're going to talk about turning, how speed affects turning, rate versus radius, and sustained versus instantaneous turn rate. We're going to start by talking about how speed affects turning and rate versus radius. So you may have heard of the concept before, but essentially, to give you an example, here we have two aircraft. Okay, we're looking at this from a top-down view, and the arrows are representative of their flight paths. These two aircraft are the same kind of aircraft, and they are going at different speeds. Both are going to be turning for a total of 10 seconds here, and they're both going to be pulling as hard as they possibly can to their left. So, if we look at their radius here, if you've ever been in a geometry class, you'll know that radius is half the diameter of their circle. We can see that the radius of the first guy here, at a slower airspeed, generally has a tighter radius, and the person with a higher airspeed has a larger radius. Now, in terms of rate, okay, rate is measured in something we call degrees a second. Now, when you think about a circle, we know a circle is 360 degrees. So when we talk about degrees a second, it's essentially measuring how much your degree has changed between a set amount of time. In this case, 10 seconds. So let's calculate this. Here we have the guy that's going 595, and he starts off facing this way, and he ends his 10-second turn facing this way. That's roughly a 90-degree turn, right? So you would do 90 degrees divided by 10 seconds, and you would get a turn rate of around 9 degrees a second. So this guy has a turn rate of 9 degrees a second. Okay, just want to show you guys how that works. Now we have this guy here. He did a total of 180 degrees in his 10-second turn. Okay, so let's double this guy. So he's going to have a turn rate of 18 degrees a second. So you'll notice here that their turn rates vary greatly. The guy with the higher airspeed in 10 seconds was able to get a turn rate of 18 degrees a second, and the guy going 595 got a turn rate of 9 degrees a second. As for their radii, which is the plural word for radius here, their radius we usually measure in feet, in this case studs. I'm not going to give you an exact measurement, but I do want you to note that the guy going faster has a larger radius. And we'll talk about why this matters in a future BFM video. So that's essentially just turn rate versus turn radius. Now, there are many things that can affect turn rate and turn radius besides just your speed. It is also highly determined by how hard you are pulling on the stick. So let me give you an example of this. That's where we kind of go into sustained versus instantaneous turn rate. And there's a difference between the two. So if we were in game right now in Project Eagle, and I was trying to do a instantaneous turn, all right, so now let's redraw this diagram. Let's give these guys the same speed value just so that we can model sustained versus instantaneous turn rate. Let's get this guy going, 600 V. And let's get another guy going 600 V. Okay, so if we have instantaneous turn rate on the left, it means you are pulling as hard as you possibly can. So in Project Eagle, that would mean your mouse is all the way up here. It's at the top of your screen. You are pulling your max turn. Just want to make sure there's no questions so far. All right, feel free to stop me at any time. So that would look something like this. You'd pull as hard as you can. He would get a super tight radius, and he would get a very, very good turn rate. This would take him maybe around 5 seconds, but let's just say for argument's sake, for the sake of not having to do math, let's say he got a turn rate of like 20 degrees a second here. which is very, very good. Now, let's look at instantaneous turn rate. Now, instantaneous turn rate is much different in contrast. So sustained turn rate, my bad, I said instantaneous twice. Sustained turn rate is essentially pulling the max amount of G's you can and your max turn rate without losing your speed. So he started here, the guy that was pulling instantaneous at 600V, but he's most likely going to end at around 490 in those few seconds that he turned. In contrast, the guy pulling sustained turn rate would have his mouse somewhere around here, a little below his instantaneous mark. And his turn rate looks something like this. And his turn in general will look something like this. Now, this would take around the same amount of time. No, sorry. This would take more amount of time than it took this guy to turn. However, the advantages of this are he starts at 600 and he ends at 600. And say the max amount of degrees a second that he was able to pull throughout this entire time was, say, 16.5. We'll talk about why this has a significant advantage later on, which it really comes into the fact that you're retaining your speed. But what I want you to get from this is that this turn is sustainable. He can continue to do this forever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever and ever. All right. He can continue to sustain 600 knots, pull 16.5 degrees a second, and be fine. However, the negative of this is obviously he's getting a lower degree a second, as if he was pulling instantaneous, and he's getting a wider radius. However, the guy on the left here is not able to sustain this. Now that he's lost a lot of his speed, we can go into what this is down here. Okay, this we call maneuverability drop off. That's what DO is for, drop off. So every aircraft has a speed at which, when you get too slow, you'll start to lose maneuverability. In the F-15 that you're going to be flying, that's around 500 to 490. So we talked about how this guy starts at 600. He pulls this massive degree a second, and he pulls this radius, an instantaneous turn. And he ends up ending off at around 490. He bled off a lot of speed while doing this. Meaning that because his maneuverability drop-off is around 490, this guy will no longer be able to sustain his turn, and his turn is going to look something of this magnitude now. He's no longer going to get that really nice tight turn that he had. He's going to get something like this. So if during this initial part of his turn he was pulling, like we said, 20 degrees a second, now because he can't sustain it, now he's pulling more like 10 degrees a second, which is lower than the sustained. So there's pros and cons to both. We'll talk about, again, why these are very important and when not to use them, when to go into sustained and when to go in instantaneous. But for now, I want you to understand the mechanics of it. You should know that there's a drop-off speed. You should know rate versus radius. And you should know what a sustainable turn is and what an unsustainable turn is. This is instantaneous. This is sustained. All right. Any questions on any of that so far? Nope. All right, then.